on that note, let me hand it over to you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Kathleen. And hello to all my dear friends, our dear friends. Oops, I'm gonna get PowerPoint up here. Can? All right, I'm up there somewhere. I can't believe, I really can't believe it's almost 6 years ago that we left North Salem and left so many dear friends. Edward Burlingame, who's here tonight, when he found out we were moving, said, well, Paige, I think I know the name of your next book. And I said, what is that? And he said, Uprooted. And here it is. That's the name of my new book. Thank you, Edward. I'm going to start by reading a little bit from the first chapter in the book, which is called Leaving. And I suspect a lot of you have been to Duck Hill, and so some of these pictures will be familiar to you. We walked away from 34 years of making, nurturing, loving a garden. How many thousands of perennials and bulbs did we leave behind? How many flowering shrubs? Hundreds? How many trees that we planted young and watched grow and stretch, becoming flowering umbrellas, casting shade and turning fiery in the fall? We left behind the drifts of flowers that only happen with the culmination of years. Snowdrops, winter aconites, spring phlox in the woodland, foxgloves for bascums, Johnny jump-ups, poppies, and larkspur in the graveled gardens, lungworts spreading their haze of blue in the back of the borders. I thought that I would always live at Duck Hill, that this would be my last house. It wasn't big, a simple farmhouse, old and quirky with small book-filled rooms littered with down-cushioned sofas and chairs in faded linens and chintz, forgiving frayed oriental rugs on the floor. There were enough bedrooms in its rabbit warren to house our children when they came home, and in later days, their wives and husbands, their children. The kitchen, the heart of the house, was spacious with a great old Garland stove, shelves of crockery, and a long table and chairs in the middle, and doors opening out onto the terrace and garden. It is so American to turn our backs on a home, to move on. And American too, that in a matter of months, it is all wiped away, those drifts of flowers, those fragrant shrubs, those young trees. Even the old farmhouse is torn down, obliterated to make way for the new important structure that is the new owner's home. And now, soon after, this seemingly foreign place, no longer my home, was put on the market again. Well, people say, why did you do it? Why did you leave this place? And the answer is twofold. Finances, for one. We all know that Westchester County is an expensive place to live because of taxes. And if we were going to be honest with each other, we had to admit that the garden was getting to be too much for us. Bosco had turned 80. I was no spring chicken. And it was 3 acres of pretty intensive plantings. I felt stricken for a while after we made the decision to move. But slowly, I felt stirrings of excitement about a new nest. I dreamt of a meadow and an orchard and another quirky old farmhouse. Bosco dreamt of a Victorian with high ceilings and those impossibly steep staircases. We knew that it was going to be a compromise. We had decided that where we wanted to move to was not very far away. It was the northwest corner of Connecticut. I've always loved it up there. I love the openness of it. It's very much like North Salem, but perhaps it's very much like North Salem was 50 years ago or 30 years ago. Open, rolling, with this wonderful farmland, lots of incredible rocks everywhere. And I guess the difference is always in the distance, or sometimes quite up close, are the hills of the Berkshire Mountains, or the foothills. We looked for many months without much luck. And finally, we ended up not with either a farmhouse or a Victorian. We ended up with an old church. It's an old meeting house that was built in 1793 as the first Methodist church in New England. The reason we bought it is this. This is what that old church looks out onto. 17 acres of fields and woods and some beautiful trees, and in the distance, those wonderful foothills of the Berkshires. Well, having fallen in love with this land, Bosco and I came back home to Duck Hill, scratching our heads on how to make the house livable. It had never really been made into a home with a lot of thought. There was a living room, but it was a narrow galley-like space, not even big enough for a circle of chairs. There was no fireplace. And so we weren't quite sure what to do about the house. Fortunately, right down the street from us, from this house in Falls Village, lives an old friend of ours, Bunny Williams, who, as you all know, is a wonderful garden interior designer. And she hopped in her car and went over, saw what we loved about the site, and called me up on the phone and said, I know exactly what you should do. Make that narrow living room into your bedroom, and on access with the front door of the house, add on a living room and a fireplace. And that's what we did. We ended up asking an architect called Peter Talbot to help us figure out this addition. We didn't want to really disturb the integrity of the old church. And we knew about Peter's work already, because when Bosco and I got married in 2000, and Bosco sold his house where he used to live in Irvington, New York, Peter helped design this one-room building structure for Bosco, and it's where he spent much of his days. And we called it the Boscotel. And I'm sure, in fact, I think it still exists. I think this building is still on the property. So the new living room is very much in that spirit, with a high ceiling and these wonderful long windows that bring in the sunlight during the day and the moonlight at night. And between the old church and the new living room, there were a series of small rooms, and that's where I now have my library. Soon after we moved in to Church House, as we call it, I posted this picture taken from the front door of the house. I posted it on Instagram. And one of my followers commented on it, and obviously she knew the garden at Duck Hill. And her comment was, I can't wait to see what you're going to do with this. And I was horrified. I said to myself, no, I'm not going to do anything with this. I think it is perfect the way it is. What we loved really about the new place was this wonderful sense of sky and space and air. Church House is surrounded by fields and a real sense of openness. And it's in complete contrast to Duck Hill, where a necklace of hedged rooms enclosed the house and confined it, gave it an intimate kind of confinement. That, to me, that just seemed inappropriate to our new house. What I had in mind instead for a garden was a sense of transparency. I wanted to use a lot of plants that, well, a lot of natives really, but a lot of plants that were like meadow plants that swayed and waved in the wind, and that you could see through to the wildland. So there was a connection between the garden and the fields. We had inherited the bones of a garden in the front of the house, a stone wall and 2 lovely shad trees, serviceberries, and peonies. There were lots of peonies, but nothing much else. And although I might not have on my own decided to do a flower garden smack in front of the house, since it was already there, the bones of it, I decided to go for it and have fun with it. And so I added baptisias and catmint and alliums, and I put a gravel path in the middle and added Amsonias, and here you see is spirea and the wonderful veronicastrums and asters and mullins, verbascums, and the blue is a fairly new plant to me, but a native called skullcap, and the Latin name is scutellaria, and it's just this beautiful blue and blooms for many, many weeks. And I also wanted to have plants in that garden that would attract birds and butterflies. And so I added things like Helianthus lemon queen, which the goldfinches love. And the purple is ironweed, Vernonia. And in August, it's just dancing with butterflies. In this case, the giant black swallowtail butterfly. In the back of the house, where the new addition is, we had to build a wall, a retaining wall, because of the difference in level. And so we did. What I didn't realize, what neither Bosco or I realized, is that we were building a vole condominium. I had never had trouble with voles before, but they're just loving this new stone wall. Happily, meet Sadie, our beloved Sadie, who is an excellent vole hunter and catcher. She doesn't eat them, she brings them to us as this great presence, sometimes once a day. I pushed the wall out from the new living room so that we could have a place for a terrace. And I filled it with gravel because I love gravel. I've always loved gravel, had tons of gravel at Duck Hill. And I love when things seed in it, like here you see some Johnny jump ups and actually those poppies, which I didn't plant, but aren't they fine? And then below the stone wall, and you see it here in its infancy, I decided I'd like to have a little cutting garden, a garden for lettuces and annuals. We had, and it was already on disturbed land. It was in full sun, seemed like a nice place to have it. here, here it is. It's quite small. I think it's only about 30 feet square. And when we came to Falls Village, when we came to Church House, we said we are not going to have a big vegetable garden the way we did at Duck Hill. This was our vegetable garden at Duck Hill. And Bosco used to grow 25, 30 different kinds of heirloom tomatoes, and let alone all the tomatoes that he grew for the library sale. And it was a large garden. Its centerpiece was this Greek Revival chicken house that a friend of ours designed. And there were two long borders on either side of the chicken house. And they were really for cutting flowers. But every spring in March, especially if we'd had a snow, I would take a seed packet of Shirley poppies and sprinkle them on top of the snow. And by June, we would have this wonderful, gay display of poppies. Later, they would when they were over, I'd pull them out and replace them with nasturtiums and dahlias. Well, in our tiny new cutting garden, I'm still sprinkling around some of those poppy seeds, Shirley poppy seeds in the snow. And I love them. And they're actually quite wonderful for cutting if you put the stems under a flame for a second or two. And here's just a jug in the living room full of those dear poppies. We have a lot of cedar in the woods, a lot of, it's really juniper, but it's called the Eastern red cedar. And I have this wonderful young man named John, and he works for me one day a week. And he actually works for Bosco one day a week too. So we're both lucky. But anyway, on the day he works for me, he builds a lot of things, among other things. And he did build this fence around the cutting garden. But then I thought that the garden needed a little extra structure. So I drew a picture of some tutors on a piece of paper, and I asked John if he could make them this was one winter when we didn't have that much to do. And he said, sure. And he made 4 of these kind of charming tutors out of our cedar. And one advantage of moving north is that now I can grow sweet peas. I never had a whole lot of luck with sweet peas at Duck Hill, but we can have sweet peas up here. It's so exciting. And so they're the first thing that we have climbing on those tutors. And then later in the summer, I do things like scarlet runner beans. And by then the garden's exploding with cosmos and zinnias and all sorts of annuals that I love for cutting. I never planted one Verbena bonariensis, which is what this is, but the seed must have been in our compost. And anyway, at the end of the summer, place is just hopping with this Verbena. And it's right through until November, or until we have a hard frost. And the butterflies actually love it. So I let it be. And then at the end of the summer, I pull it all up. I've always had a weakness for roses, and I had so many roses at Duck Hill. And we don't have, I'm not doing that here. I'm not having a rose garden. But around the edge of the cutting garden, I decided to have mostly some species roses that I love. This is Rosa hugonis. This is the Father Hugo rose, and it's the first rose to bloom in May. and has that lovely brunette-like tiny foliage that never looks bad, and pale yellow fragrant flowers. And this is another species rose we grow around the cutting garden. It was a gift from a friend. It's called Rosa pendulina, and it has these elegant hips that turn red by late summer. And I grow the eglantine rose. This is the rose of Shakespeare. And one of the reasons I love it is that its foliage, especially on a humid day or after rain, smells of apples. If you just have to walk, you can be several feet away from it and you get this waft of apple cider, apples. And it also has hips that cling on in the wintertime. And the other rose that I grow around that garden is called the apple rose. And it's, again, it's famed for its hips. And they really are big and look so pretty. And they usually linger on well into winter. Here, you're seeing it probably in September with Helianthus lemonqueen. But this year, we had chipmunks for the first time. And this chipmunk ate every single one of those hips. He had to be the healthiest chipmunk in the northwest corner. So we are hipless right now. Bosco had a greenhouse off the Boscatel in North Salem, and he loved that greenhouse. But he said, nope, we're cutting back. We're not going to have a greenhouse at Church House. And after the first winter, he said, oh, I miss my greenhouse so much. So we found out about a kit that you can get that was recommended by the New York Botanical Garden. And it's much simpler, less fancy than what we had at Duck Hill. Much greener, much better at keeping in the heat or all that sort of thing. And so we added on to the garage. And a friend of ours, a garden writer named Matt Mattis, recently said that his greenhouse was his man cave. And I realized that Bosco's greenhouse is his man cave. That's where he loves to be. And when I can't find Bosco anywhere, I know to look in the greenhouse, and there he is, potting and repotting and watering and fussing over his plants. This is the back of the house, and it was an excuse to make another gravel terrace where I'm allowing things to seed about. I'm just playing with it. So up above the cutting garden and the house and the greenhouse was a slope, and it had these two old pear trees. And we also have a couple of old apple trees that don't have very tasty apples. And I longed for that apple orchard. So I went out and bought what I thought was fairly expensive trees and planted them. And Bosco looked at them, and he looked at me and he said, Paige, do you know how old I am? And I realized that I should have spent a little more money and gotten bigger trees. We don't have a deer fence around our 17 acres. And so the first couple of years, I just had stakes and wires around those trees. And of course, the stakes would start to lean and the wire would bulge, and it was pretty ugly. And I was with some friends in England, and I saw these wooden cages around trees in this pasture in England. I'm sure they were to keep the cows away from the trees. And I thought, well, we can do that. So again, I said to John, will you go in the woods and find cedar, and let's make these supports for these embraces for our apple trees. You can't see it in the picture, but there are 3 lines of just plain wire underneath the top rail so that they can't sneak under. And it does seem to keep the deer at bay, but more important, they give those tiny trees a little bit of gravitas. There were fields on both sides of the house when we came to Church House, but I've allowed the fields to expand. I don't see any point in having a huge amount of lawn. And this field in the back of the house, without any help from me, is just rich in wildflowers, native wildflowers. This is July and it's full of black-eyed Susans and fleabane. This is a flower new to me. It's called thimbleweed. It's a kind of anemone that crops up in the fields and the edges of the woods. And this is also new. It's a lobelia, but it's not our big fat blue lobelia that we know, or the red lobelia. This is a lobelia called spicata, and it's delicate and it just weaves its way in among the grasses and flowers in the field. And one of my favorite native field flowers is bergamot. It's Monarda fistulosa, and when it blooms, it just creates these sheets of mauvey lavender. It takes your breath away. It's so pretty. And of course, the bees and butterflies love it. And then I've allowed milkweed to crop up here and there, not only because of monarch butterflies, but also for the fragrance of its flowers. If you're anywhere near a milkweed when it flowers, you're just hit with this most beautiful perfume. Well, as thrilling as it is to have those native wildflowers in the fields, to me, the essence of the fields are the native grasses. This is in the front field, and it's called Little Blue Stem, and it is indeed native. And every year, I see more and more of it. It's spreading, which thrills me. And in the late fall, it turns this tawny, beautiful tawny color. We don't mow our fields until spring because the seed heads of the flowers and the grasses are wonderful food for the birds. And I love the way the fields look with their seed heads in the wintertime. This is another native grass that we have called Indian grass. It's a sorghastrum. I'm just going to read a little bit from just a paragraph from a part of the book with a chapter called Fields. Those fields, the front one and the back field, animate my days. Whether I'm walking our property or working in the garden or indoors looking out a window, the movement, the life those fields offer from wind and from the bird and insect life they attract is my fond distraction. We have mowed paths throughout our meadows or fields around their edges and then through their middles. And I've always found something beguiling about a path in a field. I love not only that sense of going on an adventure, of wanting to walk that path and see what is the end of it, but also visually the velvet of the mown path ribbon, you might say, through these higher, softer grasses. All of our paths lead to paths that I've made in the woods, so that you can thread through and just go on an adventure on a walk. This path takes you into what I call our high rocky bluffs, high rocky woods. It's when we first bought the place, I didn't know these existed. And when I first found them one snowy day, I had no idea whether they were ours or not. They're extraordinary rock structures, in some places 3 stories high, and they just took my breath away. What this is a calcareous habitat. We are on limestone. This is marble dust that you see. And because we're so close to the Housatonic River, there's a whole thread of limestone that goes along the river. And we are blessed with this. It is a habitat I've never known before, and it supports trees and shrubs and flowers and grasses that are new to me. So it's quite thrilling. This is typical. That grass that you see is really a sedge. It's called the bristleaf sedge, Carex eburnia, and it only grows on limestone rocks. And this round-leafed plant you see is ragwort. It's a Pachyra obovata. And again, it is only to be found in these high rocky limestone habitats. And its claim to fame is that it's the only food for the larvae of the endangered northern metalmark butterfly. And butterfly enthusiasts get really excited about these woods of ours. This is a lovely fern that only grows in this habitat. It's called ebony spleenwort. And this is one of my favorite flowers that grows all summer and fall, just coming right out of the rocks. It's a campanula called, I think it's called, I'm just forgetting the name. It's called Campanula rotundifolia. And these high rocky woods are full of oak saplings. And because we have deer, and because I really want the oaks to all grow up, this is a kind of oak called the chinkapin oak. About twice a month, I go with this smelly organic stuff called deer defeat. And I go around and I spray all the little saplings to keep the deer at bay. And it actually seems to work. Well, if you're in the front of the house and you follow Sadie down this path, past that hump there on the right, which is a boulder full of columbines in May. We call it the Columbine Rock. But if you continue past that, you come to a grove, a white pine grove that leads you down into deep, rich, dark woods. And here, there are just tons of ferns and jack-in-the-pulpits and rue anemone and trilliums and the star flower, which is the flower on the cover of my book, a really enchanting little wildflower. And in the winter, gorgeous mosses. And so exciting to me, groves of our native witch hazel, which is just fills the low woods with sunshine when the leaves turn golden, and it flowers in November. Kind of a thrill to have that surprise when you're walking in the woods in November. On one side of the woods, it gets very wet and it's full of skunk cabbage, which I think of as our native hosta. And this little corduroy walk that we've made, we being the royal we, John made it, takes you out to a small wetland that we own. It's actually a fen, which is a calcareous wetland that's incredibly rich with wildflowers. And here's a picture of it in October, when it's just a haze of lavender blue from asters. Right now, right this minute, John and I are building a boardwalk through this small wetland, which is my latest excitement. This is a picture of a low part of our front field that was fairly wet, and it was choked with mostly Rosa multiflora and buckthorn and a bad winter shrub honeysuckle, European honeysuckle. And in the late winter and early spring, we cut all of that down, pulled it out, cut it down. And in its place, this fall, what you're seeing are dogwoods, shrub dogwoods turning lovely colors, and viburnums. And it was just such a thrill to see these natives thriving where we got rid of the invasives. This is what a lot of the low woods looked like when we first came to Church House, mostly honeysuckle and buckthorn and bittersweet. And John and I have been clearing all of that out of the woods. And here's the same area with all of that gone. And what you see in the understory is the witch hazel, and also a native understory plant called prickly ash, which claim to fame is it is the preferred food for the larvae of the giant black swallowtail butterfly. Well, as we cleared all these small trees and shrubs that were invasive, we were scratching our head about what to do with them. And I suggested to John that we just make brush piles. And that's what we've done. And so throughout the woods, actually, there are these brush piles that to me look like beaver houses or land art. I kind of love them. And they're wonderful habitats, probably for all the rabbits that are eating my garden, but also for birds, for like this little chipping sparrow, a place to escape into if a hawk is around. And I love that idea of having a use for debris. So I'm going to read you a little bit of a chapter called A Different Emphasis. The gardens we've made in the past 5 years, the echoes of Duck Hill we've introduced give us much pleasure. Cold frames, greenhouse, orchard, gravel paths and terraces, the flower borders to walk through, perennials and flowering shrubs to cut. All of this enriches our days. But daily I find I am drawn away from the gardens to the wild. I cannot easily explain why the fields and the woods we've inherited call to me in the way the flower gardens do not. Perhaps it is precisely because they're not cultivated. They hold mysteries. They offer discoveries unknown to me. I thrill to the unexpectedness of flowerings almost every day in spring, summer, and fall as I walk through the meadows and along the woodland paths, many that send me to the books to find their names. I'm beguiled by the traces and sightings of denizens that share our land, not only birds, but bears and bobcats, coyotes, and turkeys. Here at Church House, we've stumbled on a landscape rich in ecological value, thanks to its diversity of natural habitats. Deep, rich woods feeding into wetland, low, damp meadow rising to fields high and dry, upland, rock-littered forest. Yes, our 17 acres have been monkeyed with over the years, over the centuries, first possibly by Indians clearing and burning, then by settlers, and finally by farmers. But only traces of their inhabitants are apparent now, and the young woods show inspiring signs of regeneration. This is as close as I'll be in a lifetime to stewarding a piece of land in its wild state, and it has changed me as a gardener. I'm going to end with one other piece. It's called Sharing a Home. This is actually a picture of Duck Hill. Duck Hill was always mine. When Bosco and I got married in 2000, I had lived there for 19 years. The gardens were established, the boxwoods shoulder high, the flowers in satisfying drifts. The house was my cozy nest. It was my haven, my solace, the place where I loved most to be. It's not easy to move into someone else's home, especially if at least one of you is possessive. One of Bosco's pleasures has always been working in a garden, but it was hard for him at first to find a niche in mine. I was forever editing, attempting to create an atmosphere, more interested in painting pictures with plants than acquiring them. Bosco lives to acquire plants, loves nothing more than accumulating and propagating plants, never bothering much about where they're going to go in the scheme of things. Design is not his thing. It's the doing that he loves. The dust gradually settled during those first years of our marriage, and we learned to accommodate and appreciate each other's ways. During our time at Duck Hill, we developed new areas of our land, the woodland path, the vegetable garden, the pool enclosure, the orchard. Together, we built the Greek Revival chicken house, and Bosco enthusiastically took over caring for our brood, chickens, ducks, turkeys, saving every green or sweet scrap from the kitchen for their delectation, gathering eggs in return. We built the Boscatel so he would have a room of his own. He had his greenhouse, he had a pool, but the garden was always thought of and known as mine. The old farmhouse too. Bosco never got used to its low ceilings and walls of books everywhere. And although his pictures were hung where there was room and his furniture and bibelots woven in, he never loved the house the way I did. It wasn't hard for him to leave. How fine then to end up in a place we discovered together, neither his nor mine, but ours. I think we love it equally. Daily, we pinch ourselves about living here, about how lucky we are. Each window, each door in the house frames a view of the hills and sky, and we'll call to each other to come look at the fleeting light, at the shadows, at the colors. In summer, when we linger on the terrace into dusk and the sunlight abandons the fields around us, suddenly Canaan Mountain is lit golden lavender or flaming orange. And we say, oh, oh, look, isn't it wonderful? That's the end of my talk. Here's Sadie.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you. So I think that she'd be happy to take questions now. So if you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself, raise your hand, say something.
Or not. Does anyone have a question?
You have one in chat.
Thank you.
One from, yes, thank you, from an Annie Farrell.
So it's very different here than it was at Duck Hill. And I think of Duck Hill with such fondness, and all those years in North Salem with tremendous fondness. But our heart is here now. It didn't take long.
Paige, it's Idris.
Hi, Idris.
How are you in Bosco?
You're well.
Wonderful. Along with your wonderful words, I was wondering, did you do the photographing, or what combination of people?
I have to count. I would say maybe half of those pictures are mine, and the other half were two professional photographers. One, a woman named Nak Min No, who took the pictures of Church House for the book, because the book Uprooted does have pictures in it. And the other was a wonderful woman named Marion Brenner, who a few years ago took pictures of Duck Hill. Maybe it's, I don't know. I think about half of the pictures were mine because you know, I'm the one who's here and see things and snap.
Day to day. Mhm.
Yeah.
I think John McKay and Nancy Bink have something they'd like to say, Paige.
Hi, John.
Hi, Paige. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Good. We miss you both. We miss you both terribly. I was wondering, what are your plans for the pool and the pool house area?
Well, I didn't show you. If you look in the book, you'll see pictures of the pool house. There is a garden there. What are my plans? I'm trying not to dig any more beds. Really tempting. I heard myself say to Bosco, maybe we should make this bed a little bigger and for dahlias, and I couldn't believe I was saying that. But anyway, it's mostly hydrangeas there in that garden, and we're gonna paint the pool house. I keep painting it and hating how it looks. We're gonna cover it with vines, I think, because it's kind of brutalist architecture. But we love having the pool house. It's great.
It's a charming combination.
Yeah, no. And Bosco swims in the pool every day. I only swim in it when it's really hot. But he loves the pool. It's one of his joys.
Thank you.
Hey, Paige.
Yes.
Hi, it's John.
Hi, John.
Good to see you, and Bosco too. I assume he's looming around there someplace.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your community and how you've been received up there. I know it's been years now, but you must have sort of bonded with some like-minded neighbors in the community.
Indeed, we have. And what's really neat up here is that it isn't just, it's not so much the individual towns as it is the northwest corner of Connecticut. So it's Falls Village, Cornwall, Sharon, Lakeville, Salisbury. I probably have forgotten something, but anyway, those towns, and they're full of absolutely wonderful people, lots of creative people, artists, writers, so a certain amount of people who've retired here, but what's interesting, since COVID happened, we have more and more young people who used to come up on the weekends and are now here full time and are saying to themselves, I'm not going back to the city. It's really interesting. And of course, all these communities desperately need young people. So we're thrilled to see that. But they're just fascinating. It's just such fun, because the difference is, John, that we don't have horses here. So it's not a horseback riding community at all. I mean, that if you're inclined that way, you go to Millbrook.
So you have to buy manure.
I have to beg no. There's plenty of manure. It's just cows, not horses. Yes, we can beg cow manure just about anywhere.
Probably works better anyway.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there are a few horses, but it's just not a real horse community the way North Salem is or the way Millbrook is.
Right.
It's So it's a little different, and a lot of fun. We've met so many wonderful people here.
Great.
Lots of gardens, guys.
Mhm.
Come up and see gardens. It's just incredible gardens up here.
Are
Um,
they from in the open garden program with the
Uh,
Garden
oh,
Conservancy?
a lot of them are open for the open days, yeah, in this whole area, and really worth coming to. And if we all have vaccines in this spring, maybe I'm hoping there'll be lots of gardens open.
Good.
Who
I
knows?
missed it this year.
No, I mean, it's fun. And we also have a big fair up here that people from New York come to it. In fact, people fly in for it. It's called Trade Secrets. And all kinds of big time nursery people come. And of course, it didn't happen this past spring, and not sure it's going to happen this spring, but then it'll be back. And it's a fun excuse to come up. No.
Are you active, Paige, in the open days?
Yeah.
Garden,
so-
you are?
Yeah. And also I'm active in a few public gardens around here.
Mhm.
Weathersfield in Millbrook, and Stonecrop in Garrison, New York, and Hollister House in Washington, Connecticut. Those are all gardens I'm involved in. And the Berkshire Botanic Garden too. I'm on an advisory board there. So yeah, I'll keeps me busy. Yeah.
Now, Bink asked, do you have any idea of what would happen to Duck Hill when you sold it?
No, certainly not.
Yeah.
I knew the garden beds would go away. I didn't know they were going to just scrape the place. It's pretty horrifying. And anyway,
Did they change a lot of the gardens or did they leave some?
nothing,
You know,
nothing,
nothing.
nothing.
After all
asked-
that work.
Well, it's just, I don't think of it as all that work. I think of it as, especially things like that little woodland path we had. And there were just so many treasures. I mean, every kind of trillium and anemone. And I mean, and because we left in December, we couldn't dig up any of those little treasures, or we didn't. We actually did give some things away, I think in the fall before we sold the house. But and I remember I asked the new owner if we could come back in April, and if she wasn't interested, or if she was going to clear it, if we could come back and dig some of those wild, spring ephemerals, those wonderful plants. And she said, absolutely, give me a call in the spring. And I called her in the spring and she said no. And I think they'd already scraped the land. So it was just, I just would have liked somebody to have those plants, not to just have them scraped away by a bulldozer. But we did, when we knew we were moving, but before we actually had signed a contract, we did give away pieces of this and that to all sorts of friends. And so some things did survive. And sometimes those friends bring them back to me, which is kind of fun. John McKay, got your hand raised? Oh, maybe he doesn't mean to.
Sorry about that. No.
Okay. Well, I suspect everybody's ready to go have a drink. It's lovely to see all your faces and hear all your voices. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you,
to see you, Paige.
Paige.
All right.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Paige. Somebody else had a question on chickens. So are you raising more chickens?
No,
No.
no.
Too many foxes.
Well, yeah, we just don't have quite the right spot for them. And Bosco said, no, he's not going to do that anymore. So I have to beg eggs from some of the wonderful farms around here. I miss the chickens, but you know, how much can you do? It's just have to.
When I come up, I'll make sure to bring you some. I still have chickens.
Don't you dare.
Yeah.
No, eggs,
Oh,
eggs.
eggs. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I mean,
Paige,
we have
are
a
you
lot.
selling any signed books? I'm sorry, go ahead. Are you selling any signed copies of your book?
You mean for you? No, for what?
No, I mean, it's just if I would like personally to give one to a friend of mine. And so I just wondered, I thought maybe you would, if we want to buy one, we need to buy one through the publisher. So you haven't signed some at a bookstore someplace.
I haven't signed any down by you at a bookstore. Maybe I should go into the one in is the one in Ridgefield the closest bookstore that you have?
It is Books on the Common, or that might be.
Maybe next time I'm down, I could.
Okay.
You know, some of the bookstores call me and say, will you come in and sign some books? But I don't know if anybody, I don't know whether.
You want to go in? No, I
Oh,
understand.
no, I'm perfectly happy to sign the books, but, and I would think Books in the Common would have it. They carried all my other books, so I'm sure they have it. The other possibility is that I don't know. It's tricky. You could come up and I'll sign your book.
Okay. Thank you.
Paige, I know Bird's Books in Bethel also supports local Connecticut authors, and she
Good.
usually has a so I'll mention your book to her
Please
Okay.
do.
if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. No, absolutely.
They're not available through the Botanical Gardens, New York Botanical
Oh,
Gardens
sure.
either.
Oh, sure. I'm sure they have it.
Okay,
I think it's pretty available.
but not signed.
No,
Not
not
signed.
signed. There's a bookstore in Kent that has them signed, and there's a bookstore in Millerton called Oblong that has them signed. You could call them up and they'd send it to you. But
Okay.
Linda, hi.
Hello. Yes, here I am.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Very nice to see you. Yeah. And it is different not being in North Salem, isn't it?
Very different. Yeah. He's very different. I didn't know how different it would be in a way, but yeah. I mean, the one really impact the things that impacts us, not so much now with COVID, but is that it's a whole lot longer to get to the city. So we don't do that as lightly as we used to. I mean, we can hop on a train in Armenia, which is what we do, to come into the city, but you know, it's about if you count it all up, it's about 5 hours of travel for a day in the city or an evening in the city. So
Well, let me know ahead of time, because right the year before COVID hit, I bought an apartment.
oh, good for you. I'm so glad you did, Linda.
So if you need a place to stay over, just give me a call. Okay.
Thank you. Well, COVID's not going to go on forever, right?
No. Just don't get in my way for the line for the vaccine.
Oh, tell me about it.
Pushing
Yeah.
people out of the way.
For once, being older might
Might
advantage.
be in our
I'm
favor.
not absolutely sure it's going to be an advantage, but maybe. Anyway, yeah, I'll be right in front of the line too.
This silly cat, I'm not a cat person. I inherited this. And she's biting,
Friday?
biting, because it's time to eat.
Oh. She sounds like our old cat from hell. I don't know. if you've read- Anyway, I write about Psycho Cat in the book, but
She's sitting right.
yeah.
Well, so good to see you.
Good to see you all of you, Frank and John and Linda and Carolyn and Susie and everybody. So shall we say goodbye? What do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
for-
Kate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Good to see you all.
Kathleen.
Right.